Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome, listeners. This is a new edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. It's Monday, August 5th. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz. We are here to discuss the first four practices of Ohio State football training camp. The Buckeyes opened last Thursday, and with all four of those practices open to the public, reporters were also there, including Bill and me. So we're going to talk about what we saw. And Bill, I figured we might as well start with quarterbacks. It's the biggest storyline of camp on a team that doesn't have all that many position battles, but it has a competition at the position that draws the most attention. They have 5 scholarship quarterbacks, and they are rotating all of them pretty much at this point in camp.
Yeah, I don't want to make too much out of 4 days, especially when they were not in pads and there's no tackling, and even in practice, quarterbacks are not. They don't hit the quarterback. That's like the cardinal, the main rule of training camp, of practice, really any time of the year. You don't hit the quarterback. But 4 days was enough for me, at least, to declare that Will Howard is the clear front runner. Not that he's the starter. It is premature for that. But we saw yesterday at practice on Sunday that in all the team drills, he was the first one to take snaps. Previously, they had alternated. He and Devin Brown had alternated. And on Sunday, it was all Will Howard. Now, that's not to say that on Tuesday, Devin Brown might take all the snaps with the starters, but we're not going to be there to see that. So, who knows? All we can go by is what we see. And not just that he took the first reps. He looks different. I mean, I was told that he lost almost 15 pounds from the time he arrived at Ohio State, weighing almost 250 pounds. And I think he got his marching orders from Ryan Day and Mickey Marotti that ain't going to cut it. We don't want our quarterbacks that big. And so he re-sculpted his body, lost some weight, gained some muscle, whatever. He does look different. I think he's listed at 235 right now, 6'4", 235. And he looks, he's moving well. You can tell he's moving well. We get to talk to him tomorrow. I am looking forward to that. I'd like to know, what exactly went into the changing of his body, how he feels about things. But he just generally looks to be in command of the offense and certainly looks good just physically.
Yeah, I would say we saw a few things from Will Howard that I think, to your point, makes him the front runner in this competition. One, Ohio State has talked about wanting to upgrade at that spot with some mobility from the quarterback position. You saw that when he took off on during Saturday's practice. He had this long run where he broke free from the defense and went off down the sidelines for about 80 yards, and they can't really tackle him at that point. But he's running with the defenders, and he looked pretty good moving in that sequence. And then you've also seen times in practice where he just looks crisp in command. He hasn't thrown an interception, completes a majority of the passes, even if the plays aren't spectacular. He keeps the offense in a good flow, and I think that stood out because we've seen some freshmen from mistakes from Julian Sayin and Devin Brown. You see the flashy big throws during Friday's practice. He ended with his beautiful throw over the middle to Bryson Rogers, just a really pretty deep ball. And Devin Brown can throw the deep ball is probably as well, if not the best of any quarterback on the roster. But the consistency that I thought Will Howard showed in combination with some of the athletic traits sort of shows you why he was the front runner coming into fall camp. And through 4 practices, nothing we've seen has sort of disputed that.
Yeah, I would also kind of issue the caveat that none of these guys has lit up the defense. The defense, which we knew going into the season would be kind of a monster defense, they are looking like it. It seems like you raise your eyebrows when they complete a 15-yard pass downfield because it doesn't happen very often. They're just right on these receivers. Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun both had breakups in practice on Saturday. Jordan Hancock has played well. Caleb Downs, we've talked about Caleb Downs, the transfer from Alabama, who was a freshman All-American last year. And I tell you, again, you can't see that much with what we've seen in practice, but he has the range and the speed and the instincts He made a play, I think it was Saturday, where he was started off pretty deep and he diagnosed the play, came up, and there was a deflection, and he made a cradling interception that just not a lot of guys do. So you see him, Lathan Ransom's back healthy now. We know what that defensive line is like. They got a pretty big scare when JT Tuimoloau went down, was down for a couple minutes, but he got up and he's fine. Jack Sawyer's, had a sack, as much as you could have a sack. I mean, they're a really good defense. And so none of these quarterbacks looks great. But Will Howard, of all of them, has made the fewest mistakes, and it just kind of seems like he's poised and in control.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And the storyline to watch maybe moving forward is how long could this quarterback competition continue? When camp opened on Thursday, Ryan Day said his hope was that a starter could emerge in 7 to 10 days. And that's an aggressive timeline. It's a timeline that would be faster than any previous quarterback battle in Day's tenure. When CJ Stroud was named the starter, when Justin Fields was named the starter, that was 12 days exactly each time before the season opener. Last year infamously went into the season between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. I do think because of that experience, he's going to want to pick a starter before the season, certainly. Whether it materializes that early in camp would be unusual, but it is, and Day gave himself an out by pointing out that he wanted that situation to happen last year. He wanted a starter earlier in camp. It didn't happen, and it obviously went into September. But I think that's the thing to watch is how soon could maybe somebody like Will Howard win the job, or does somebody else emerge and like Devin Brown? I think Devin Brown to me feels like the only one I really could probably see unseating Will Howard, but it looks like Will Howard's job to lose based on just the poise he showed early on.
Yeah, I think there's a fairly clear pecking order, at least at the top and the bottom. I think Will Howard is the clear front runner. I think Devin Brown is a clear number 2. I think Julian Sand and Lincoln Kienholz are kind of battling for that third spot. And Julian Sand at times, I think he's got the nicest delivery of any of the quarterbacks. He just looks, the ball gets out of his hand fast. He's got a nice, clean delivery. I mean, I think he's the future quarterback, whether that future is this year, next year, or the year after. I'm not sure, but I'd be very surprised if Julian Sand is not the starting quarterback at Ohio State at some point, at some point in his career. I'm not going to say when. And anyway, those two. And then I think Aaron Nolan is clearly 5th. And there have been times in team drills where he hasn't got any reps. And so, that's how you can kind of tell stuff like that. And he kind of darts the ball. It kind of short arms a little bit. I think they might want to tinker with his motion a little bit down the road. I mean, he throws a nice ball. They all throw nice balls. But I just don't think that he's in the mix to be, a guy who's going to play unless it's emergency or mop-up duty this year. Look, I've seen 4 practices. I'm not making any drawing any blanket conclusions, just my observation based on the 4 practices I've seen. But I think that we have a clear 1, a clear 2, and a clear 5.
Well, I think for us, 4 practices of watching this team it doesn't happen all that frequently.
No, it's better than we usually get.
Right. Last year they had 2 open practices in camp, the first 2. Now they had 4 because they made tickets available to the public, which is a big reason why the media was also able to be there. I agree with you about saying, I think in terms of all the quarterbacks they have on the roster, he's very mechanically gifted in terms of his release. And Ryan Day's talked about the way he processes it. His release is quick, and just the way he can kind of move through targets is quick. He is a gifted quarterback. He's a freshman, and that's the challenge for him trying to make a steady climb. And if Ohio State does want the type of quarterback who can run, that certainly Will Howard and Devin Brown would fit that bill a little more than Julian would.
And Lincoln Kienholz, honestly, I haven't seen him do anything spectacular, but I've heard people rave about his athleticism, that he's just a really, really good athlete.
Some throws I felt like where he was flush and had to make a throw on a run. He could do that, I think, maybe as one of the better quarterbacks in the roster. I haven't seen enough of that to truly make a judgment. But he had some plays where he was throwing on the run and moving. You can kind of see the athleticism, him being a 3-sport athlete in South Dakota. And remember, he's only been on campus for a year. He's a redshirt freshman. He was not an early enrollee a year ago. So last spring, or this year's spring ball was his first spring ball that he's had. So he's been on campus for 13 months. So not a truly long time. So he's still raw in some ways and developing in particular.
And we should point out that they've generally used two fields in practice. And we I take one field, you take the other. And I think Lincoln's kind of been more on your field than my field. So,
yeah, they've had one field. They typically they'll start practice and divide up the team in two situations where you have 11 on 11. And typically one half of the starting offensive line is on one field, the other half's in the other. The running backs have typically stuck together. The receivers have kind of stuck together, but they'll still mix and match with those guys. And typically there are two groups of quarterbacks together. Will Howard and Julian Saint are on one field of 11s. Devin Brown, Lincoln Keenholz, Aaron Nolan are on the other. When they begin the 11s, Devin Brown's leading one team and Will Howard's leading the other team.
Yeah. Since you mentioned the offensive line, it's probably the logical place to go next. That's the other area of the offense that is a question mark. We know that Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer are going to be the tackles. We know that Donovan Jackson is going to be the left guard. Seth McLaughlin feels like he's going to be the center. I mean, he's taken most of the snaps. He's been fairly clean with the snaps. He had the yips last year. He had one snap on Saturday that was like, what was that? It went way, way over the head of the quarterback. But, other than that, I think he's been pretty clean. And at right guard, Tegra Shabola has probably taken the most snaps. Carson Hinsman, who played center last year, of course, and is also still a center, he's probably close to 50-50 with Tegra. Luke Montgomery, who started the spring as the quote-unquote, I don't say starting, but he was, I think, the first one to reps in the spring at that position. And then as spring went on, you saw less of him there. He's actually taken some snaps at center. And, he's not the biggest guy, but he's very athletic. And I could see that center could be maybe his position down the road. So I think that's an interesting development there that, he's a blue chip player. He wasn't a 5-star, but he was a pretty high 4-star, if I remember right. And, coveted guy. And, the more versatility you have, the better chance you have. He could be that swingman that can play either the guards or center. That might be a good place for him to go. He's a smart guy. We know that. And that's important for the center. So, but Tegra Shabola is kind of the Paris Johnson model where he's a natural tackle. And you look at him, that big number 77, and he's got a body of a tackle, but that's not where the opening is. And so he, like Paris Johnson, may have to play semi out of position for a year. I'm sure he'd be fine with that because you want to be on the field. And maybe at some point they could flip-flop him and Josh Fryer. Josh Fryer, I think, could be a pretty good guard. But Ryan Day has been very complimentary of Josh Fryer, doesn't really want to move him from right tackle.
No, I think basically the situation at right tackle is you have three guys going for one spot. Right guard. Tegra Shabola, Carson Hinsman, maybe Luke Montgomery, although he, to your point, is actually taking more snaps at center lately. But that feels like where it's ultimately going to be decided. Tegra has really stood out to me. Just you look at his size, and I think it's a little bit of it's premature to really evaluate offensive linemen off 2 days in shoulder pads and 2 days in no pads. But his size just, I think, is going to be intriguing if they do plug him into that spot. But it feels like they sort of have 7 or 8 guys really who could play. Their depth at tackle doesn't really seem quite maybe where they want. That's, I think, if one guy were to go down in the interior, they would feel okay about some of the options behind them. But tackle is probably where they're thinner on the offensive line depth when you look at some of the options they have. Because Carson Hinsman has starting experience. You like Tegra Shabola's size. Luke Montgomery obviously has the recruiting profile where he suggests he's going to play sooner rather than later. But that's sort of, I think, where things stand on the offensive line.
Yeah, and the rest of the offense, I think, is fairly straightforward. I would say that there's a little bit of a question at tight end. G. Scott has had his moments when he struggled. And, again, in the 4 practices we've seen, nothing terrible, but he's got big shoes to fill. Cade Stover was obviously an exceptional tight end in a lot of ways. And, you kind of look behind G and you go, okay, well, G, I mean, who's behind him? Last year there were lots of, Jelani Thurman, just because of his body, big rangy guy, he thought, oh man, this guy could be a force. And he still could be, but he's got work to do as a blocker. Bennett Christian, who missed last year, remember he had that, PED thing. and he's back now, and he's got a reputation as a really good blocker. Well, can he be a pass catcher? I'm not sure. They've got some guys. I just don't know that they have anybody.
Will Kazmarek as well, the transfer.
Right, Will Kazmarek, the transfer from Ohio.
The most experienced guy
right
roster in terms of just the overall number of snaps that he's played in his career, but it was the Mid-American Conference level. So you just wonder about the adjustment to playing in the Big Ten, and although they do open with 2 MAC schools, so maybe it won't be all that different for him. But his reputation is that of a blocker. They are probably, whoever starts at tight end, it's not going to be a situation where they're like last year where Cade Stover was getting a heavy majority of the snaps. It's likely going to be some sort of a by committee approach, and I could see a situation evolve over a season where they're trying multiple different guys as the starter. Right now, that seems probably is wide open a position battle to me, or as uncertain, because you do have G. Scott as a returner, but he's just never logged all that many snaps, even though he was the backup last year. Just in terms of his role, he still is fairly, I think, inexperienced for somebody who he is a fifth-year guy, but just has not played all that much in his career at Ohio State. So they need to sort of figure out what to do there. I do think the practices have given us at least a snapshot of some other position groups, maybe where there's not a quote-unquote open battle. You look at wide receiver, there's not really, I think, this a super big question mark over who's probably going to start. It's going to be Emeka Egbuka in the slot. Jeremiah Smith and Cornell Tate are getting a lot of the reps outside, but it's interesting to watch them, and Brandon Inniss is, I think, making a push as well. I think he's looked good. They lose Marvin Harrison Jr., and they might not have anybody who can quite replace him right away. They may not have that type of star, a Blitnikoff winner, a Heisman Trophy finalist, a consensus or a unanimous All-American, all that. But they have 4 guys who I think could really, really play, and they might be deeper than they were a year ago, where it was their top 4 last year. And it'd be an interesting point we could discuss at some point. But last year's 4 was Marvin, Emeka, Xavier, and Julian Fleming. This year it's Emeka, Jeremiah Smith, Cornell Tate, Brandon Inniss, and that's a pretty good 4 too, maybe even deeper than last year.
Yeah, and Bryson Rogers has made some plays. Jaden Ballard has been there forever and keep waiting for that breakthrough. He made a really nice catch yesterday. He's supposed to be, he's one of the fastest guys on the team. Maybe he's one of these guys that finally, as a senior, has that breakthrough. So yeah, I agree with you. I think Brandon Inniss is a really sneaky good player. I mean, he's a 5-star guy. He's really not sneaky. But all the attention's been on Jeremiah Smith, and Cornell Tate made a big splash last year. We know what Emeka can do, and so look, Brian Hartline has recruited this incredible pipeline, created this pipeline of 5-star receivers. It's kind of crazy, the recruiting rankings for those guys.
There was one play with Inniss which was interesting, where they, during an 11-on-11 period, they lined him up in the backfield as a second running back, then motioned him into the slot. I think they could be creative with how they use him as well. They've done some sweet plays with Emeka Egbuka in the past. And at media days, Ryan Day mentioned sort of the contingency plans of running back. Who else could move there and carry the ball? I mentioned Inniss. I do wonder with Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator, what kind of wrinkles we could see in terms of what they do with guys and how they position. Inniss is a interesting slot guy because he's not all that tall, but he looks really strong and all that. Just sort of the ways they could get him the ball.
I'm fascinated by what Chip Kelly is going to do with his offense. Just the creativity that he brings to it. Especially in the run game. Because let's face it, the run game has not been all that imaginative in the past few years. It's kind of like, okay, Travion, find a hole and go. I mean, that almost seems like the play. And now you've got Travion Henderson, and you have Quinshon Judkins, and I don't even know it's 1 and 1A. I think he just both won. Both those guys, by the way, look really good. I mean, Travion just is cutting so sharply, and Quinshon Judkins just is so quick to the hole. He's a kind of a one-cut guy, but that one cut is a really good cut. And I think that duo looks to be everything that it was built to be so far. Again, we haven't seen them actually be tackled, so it's always hard to gauge the running game, even more than the passing game at this point. But both those guys look like the real deal. It
is best shape of their life season, where guys are off of strength and conditioning workouts. They haven't been hit in a few months. They put on pads. The sun is shining. I think bodies look better this time of year. People are standing up a little taller. You don't have the wear and tear of the season hasn't really beaten you down yet.
Right.
So guys do look a little more sculpted this time of year that I think November, where you start getting the aches and the hits have sort of piled up. And you get all the bumps and bruises that come with that. This is when guys seem like they're moving, cutting the best before they start adding on the miles.
I also think James Peoples has looked really good, the freshman.
Yeah.
Sam Williams-Dixon also has looked pretty good, Pickerington kid. And those guys are probably going to play. I mean, don't forget, Ohio State lost Dalvin Hayden. They lost Chip Trainum. T.C. Caffey, who was a guy that was a walk-on that looked good when he played a couple of years ago and then was hurt last year, got hurt again. So they go from Henderson and Judkins to nobody with experience. And, especially if Ohio State blows teams out as often as we think they're going to, they're not going to want to have Travion and Judkins carry the ball in a 35-0 game in the fourth quarter. So I think those guys are going to get a lot of work. And so we're gonna find out about them.
Yeah, I think we came into camp probably wondering about just the depth at running back and how much of a concern would that be. They do seem like they have some options behind Quinchon and Travion that could help you over a long season. So to me, that's maybe not as pressing as you thought coming into the year. That's where I'm sort of on the offensive side of the ball. I still have a question at tight end. That's probably, it feels a little more in terms of things that have, I think, probably two position groups where you wondered about just the options down the depth chart or even at the top of the depth chart. Running back, I feel probably better for them about their depth. And tight end, that's still a lingering question in my mind.
Yeah, and we went through the defense briefly. Probably the big question on defense, and you wrote about this the other day, Joey, is how do they shake out a linebacker? Because you've really got three guys for two spots, and one of those spots, Cody Simon, I think Cody's going to be the new Tommy Eichenberg. He's going to be the Iron Man, the leader out there. And so it's Sonny Styles, who, of course, played safety last year, although he did play in the box a decent amount, and C.J. Hicks, the five-star guy from a couple of years ago that they keep waiting. It's not that they keep waiting. He's had to wait behind other players, but they were hoping this would be the year he would just seize the job. And so far, what we've seen is that Sonny Styles has taken more of the starters reps than C.J. Hicks. C.J. Hicks is getting some. But look, if Sonny Styles has to be on the field. If the mantra is we want our best 11 players on the field, there's not a team in the country in which Sonny Styles isn't one of the best 3 or 4 players on the field for that team. So I think they're going to have to mix and match. I mean, there could be situations when Jordan Hancock comes out and they play a 3 linebacker set with C.J. Hicks. I mean, they're going to mix and match, I think, But if they're going to just line up 11, I think at this point it's Sonny Styles with Cody Simon. Yeah,
I think that's right so far based on what we've seen. Certainly Sonny's gotten more first-team reps than CJ. Jim Knowles termed that competition as neck and neck, but based on the reps, Sonny certainly looks like the leader to prevail in that spot. That is an open question over who will start there, but to me that's a question as far as, okay, who's going to be the guy, but it doesn't. And you want to document who's going to be the person in that starting role and who's going to make the plays. But in terms of Ohio State being a productive defense, that doesn't really actually feel like a question, because whether they play as Sonny Styles or C.J. Hicks, I think they're going to be just fine on that side of the ball. Other position battles like tight end, to me, there's so few of them. But that's a question. I don't know who's actually going to start and be able to really make plays. That's an open question over productivity. Linebacker feels like a position battle. You figure whoever you play there is going to be productive. I do think when Jim Knowles was talking about this on Friday, he did bring up the point, the possibility of playing more 3 linebackers. And Ohio State has played some 3 linebacker sets before. They did that in past years with Tommy Eichenberg, Steel Chambers, and Cody Simon. But when they went into those formations, you were giving up a fair bit in pass coverage. I think what they have now, the advantage of Sonny Styles as a linebacker, is if they do go into a 3 linebacker package and you're trying to prep against maybe a more physical team and help your run defense by playing 3 linebackers, you maybe aren't giving up quite as much in your pass coverage, because Sonny has experience as a safety and effectively is sort of a hybrid safety linebacker. And so you have 3 linebackers, but you also have a guy who's quite adept in pass coverage and styles more than your typical outside linebacker.
Yeah, and really that's really the only question on defense. We know the front four is going to be Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Ty Hamilton, and Tyleik Williams, and we also know that they've got a lot of good depth behind those guys. Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson at defensive end. Mitchell Melton has looked really good, I think. Has certainly flashed a couple times. He's had a career that's been set by injuries. Edric Houston, we haven't really heard a whole lot from lately, but he's a 5-star freshman that will probably get some decent playing time. I mean, that's 6 guys right there. And on the inside, you have guys like Hero Canoe, and I mean, they've got several. Jason Moore, Larry Johnson has talked up, Caden McDonald. So they feel good
Mitchell
about.
Melton's played, I think, a fair bit as well.
Who?
Mitchell Melton's played.
Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, at the defensive end, I mean, he made a play the other day where he batted the ball down the line of scrimmage, a very athletic play. So yeah, they're loaded on the line, and they just are. I mean, I don't know that they've got a Bosa or a Chase Young, but they've got a bunch of guys that are a notch below, maybe the Sam Hubbard type kind of guy. You know, JT Tuimoloau might be a notch above that. I mean, I was talking, there was an NFL scout yesterday at the end of practice. I was talking to him, and he said basically, yeah, they're loaded. Yeah, surprise there. I say I don't know that there's a top 5 guy on the defense, but there are a bunch of guys that could go somewhere in the first round. I mean, Tuimoloau, Sawyer, Denzel Burke.
And some of the guys are probably not a top 5 guy based on body type. Denzel Burke, for example, I think is a really good shutdown corner, but he may not go in a top 10 based off his size. He's a maybe 6 feet, just doesn't.
Right.
So some of it is based on that. Although some of the guys, they could probably play themselves up. I think you're right. It's a team it's based on a depth rather than just a pure freaky top 5 defensive end pass rushing talent.
Yeah, but they're loaded. Tyleik Williams is a potential first round pick. Sonny Styles, I could see him being a first round pick. I mean, they got a bunch of guys. I mean,
they're deep too. I think to your point as well. It's those top line guys. They're deep in terms of the starters. All feel like they could be the highly selected NFL draft picks. And then you look at the second team. Jermaine Matthews had a pick of Julian saying during 11-on-11s on Sunday where he jumped a quick route and took that for a touchdown. I think he's a guy where he could start for a lot of teams in the Big Ten. He could start for Ohio State, and they would be pretty good sophomore cornerback from Cincinnati, and he's going to be a backup this year. So they have guys in that second team that are starting caliber and just probably aren't off the bat unless there's an injury.
Well, the one guy who I think would be a top 10 pick next year, if he were eligible, is Caleb Downs, but he's only a sophomore. I mean,
he does play safety, which is not always
right. But still, I mean, I've seen enough of him, just watching him, to go, I mean, this guy is special. This guy like he was born to be a safety. I mean, he just looks so fluid, looks like he just diagnoses plays so quickly. He's got the athletic ability to get there. I'm looking forward to watching him in live games because I think that he is really a difference maker. I remember the last time Ohio State had safety that almost dictated play. That was, Malik Hooker. I forget exactly the year, almost a decade ago. And he had such range. Anytime the ball was in the air, he thought he might intercept this one. And Caleb Downs is a different body type. It's not as rangy, but there is kind of that feeling like anytime the ball's in his area, he's going to make a play on it.
Yeah, he can cover a lot of ground back there. I think he's not all that tall and lanky, but he just moves so quickly.
Yes, right, so smooth.
Just so fluidly that there are going to be, I think, plays this year where you're watching on television and all of a sudden he pops into the screen.
Yeah, I agree.
The camera wasn't there and he's just going to pop in there. I think that'll probably happen a few times.
The one thing we don't know who the punter's going to be. We really have no idea who the punter's going to be, right? I mean, Jaden Fielder.
That's going to go into the third week of camp. Brian Day was more bullish on the possibility of settling on the quarterback competition early in camp.
Yeah.
That'll probably go to 3 weeks. So
2 Australians and a transfer from Buffalo.
Yeah,
were the front runners. Yeah,
that is, they have some new faces there because only Joe McGuire was there in spring practice.
Right. So, well, I think we probably covered it the first 4 days, what we've seen. They're back at it tomorrow, but we won't be. I think the next time we get to watch practice is next Thursday, I believe.
This Thursday.
Oh, it's this Thursday we get to watch it? Okay.
The Big Ten Network.
Okay. Okay.
We will be there with Ohio State's TV partner in the Big Ten and observe practice, and that's it. That is all the practice we'll be able to see in the lead up. But it's helpful to get an eye on guys and just see sort of try to form your own opinions of where things stand, or just kind of get a sort of a sense of when coaches talk up a guy to see for yourself and just all that sort of thing.
So, yeah. So anyway, well, thank you for listening. We'll be back with another podcast when we feel like it's merited, which probably will be soon. We get to talk to the quarterbacks tomorrow. We get other position groups every day the rest of the week. And so, we'll might not be able to see a lot of practice, but we'll get to talk to people who are going through it. So we haven't talked to any players yet. So that'll be nice to start tomorrow.
Yeah. We'll certainly learn some things as camp gets further into the swing of things. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will be back in your podcast feeds.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.